Thanks so much for joining me. My name's Paul Yates. I'm chair of the trustees of the AIRE Centre. And thank you very much for agreeing to speak with me. So I wonder if you could start by telling us just when you were an intern at the AIRE Centre and how long for, just a little about that.
Yeah, no problem. So I think my story is a little bit unconventional in that I started as an intern. I think it was September last year as a legal caseworker. So I was working with the more domestic team on the removal side of things, getting deportation cases put together, and then doing the odd advice letter here and there. I technically finished in January, but then I applied for one of the paid roles, went through the interview process, and must have done something right because AIRE then asked me to be one of the legal assistants on the EUSS project. Mm-hmm. So I was working on that until I think it was September this year, and then ended up moving on to my newest role. So yeah, about a year. And it took me, because of lockdown, about 11 and a half months to actually meet anyone face to face, which is really quite surreal. But when you kind of sit down and, I looked at the team across the table, I was like, oh my God, that's what you look like. It was really quite nice to meet everyone before leaving. But yeah, very, very enjoyable year, and would highly recommend it to anyone that's got an interest in what the AIRE Centre does.
That's great. And so maybe you could also tell us a bit about what you're doing now, because you're in the middle of quite an interesting experience, I think.
Yes. So at the moment, I'm a judicial assistant at the Court of Appeal. Essentially, what that means is that I do a lot of legal research, a bit of drafting here and there for my judge. Whenever he's sitting in court, I'm in court with him. Unfortunately, not on the bench with him, but to one side. So at least I get to see all of this, interesting advocacy. It's a great learning experience because I get to see what appellate advocacy is like, which isn't something I've ever dealt with before. And that's going to help me going forward for pupillage next year. So it's an interesting and very busy couple of years that I've got lined up. But at the moment, I'm drafting some research notes for a lecture that my judge is giving. And I have to say, one thing that I've realized with this work is judges in court are very busy, but outside of court, they're even busier. And I've just got this newfound respect for the sheer stamina they have, because I don't think I could manage it at this moment in time. So it's quite eye-opening, but a very, very enjoyable experience, and something that I think is going to be with me for my entire career.
That's brilliant. And so can I ask, do you find that you're using in your current role as a judicial assistant, are you sort of drawing on some of the experiences and expertise that you developed when you were an intern, or is it really just quite a different experience?
I think in terms of the skills, yes and no. I know it's a really weird answer, but I'll explain. So there are a couple of cases where I've worked on certain points of law which have overlapped with my experience at AIRE. So sitting down, reading the skeleton arguments, being like, okay, I actually understand from the get-go what's going on here. So I need to do a little bit less research, which is fine. And it means that I can form an opinion a lot quicker. And when you're dealing with litigants in person that are representing themselves in the Court of Appeal, I've found that the experience that I've had from the AIRE Centre is very helpful, because a lot of people will come to you with a problem, will have no idea as to what the legal framework is, what the points are they need to make, what evidence is required, sorry. And when you're sat there dealing with a litigant in person, you have to work that bit harder to try and string together what they're saying and translate it into, legal speak. So I think in that regard, it's been very helpful. And then on top of that, as you can appreciate, the AIRE Centre's client base has been so diverse. There's so many issues that come up that automatically translates into a new role where you have people from different backgrounds and different experiences. You can then start drawing on your own experiences and then applying them to these new situations.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And when you were looking back on your internship, that time when you were with the AIRE Centre, is there a particular, you mentioned the EUSS and some of the deportation work, but is there a particular individual case that you worked on that really stands out, or a particular sort of aspect of a project that you really, it sort of jumps out as particularly memorable or making a big impression on you?
Yes, I mean, one thing with the AIRE Centre was if you're stuck, well, I say stuck, if you're put into a team, so for me, it was the domestic team, and you want to try something different, everyone's very accommodating. And I actually worked with Markella on the third-party intervention of FAM in the UK. And that's still in the European Court of Human Rights at the moment. But for me, that's, I guess, what the kids are saying, a massive flex now, in that you can say, I've drafted something at such a high level. And it's really kind of something that I'm going to remember for the rest of my life, in that what I was doing is going to have repercussions for millions of people. I mean, in terms of the point of law, it was about detention of an individual in the US and whether the UK could then strip them of their British citizenship when their own nation didn't recognize them as a citizen. So it's a very complex case which relies on a lot of facts, but it's also quite a contemporary issue at the moment, because we've seen that quite a lot recently with a lot of national security cases, and where the line is. So it was quite interesting to see what direction both sides were taking on that.
And how about a sort of non-legal experience? Was there anything just not to do with work, as it were, that stands out as an experience from your time when you were an intern at the AIRE Centre?
I mean, I think the interns themselves, it was strange in that, as you can appreciate, we were all working during lockdown. That, as I say, I've not met anyone properly for about 11 months, and then left about 2 weeks later. So it was kind of like a hi bye. But I think the staff themselves are just very good people that you can get on well very easily with. I've still maintained a lot of contacts. My colleague that I worked with on the USS, that, you know, we would spend hours trying to pick apart a problem together, I still speak to this day. It's quite nice to have that kind of camaraderie, and you just link up as people quite nicely. Mm-hmm. So I think that the human element of it is also quite enjoyable. It's a nice place to work at. And then the work on top of it is just, you know, the extra bit, right? I think that the staff make it a lot more enjoyable than it already is. And yeah, I think the social side of it, we made the best of a bad situation. So with the interns, we used to have a Friday night Zoom call where we had this rule: we didn't talk about work, and we just tried to get to know each other a bit, which was quite nice. A bit strange when you're sat there at the time I was in Oxford, and I've got colleagues working around the continent in Europe, and we're all sat there with a glass of wine talking about random things, but it was quite the experience.
Very cool. Okay, and last question, I think, is do you have any particular kind of top tips for current interns who are working at the AIRE Centre in terms of, you know, getting the most out of the experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is there's no such thing as a stupid question. So if you don't understand something, or you think you're going down the wrong route, just ask. Everyone is so friendly and they're willing to give you the time. On top of that, I would say that if you want to get involved with something, by all means do. You know, just as I say, if you ask someone, they're more likely to turn around and say, well, I've got this case, you could do X, Y, and Z for me. It's highly unlikely someone's going to turn away the extra help, which is always quite nice for everyone. I also think that a lot of the cases the AIRE Centre does can be quite challenging in terms of emotions. Obviously, a lot of people come to the AIRE Centre, they're very vulnerable. For them, it's make or break. And it's very easy to get involved with that, and on a human level try and empathize. And sometimes the cases don't go your way, sometimes they do. And I think it's important that you try and take that step back, and not get too invested, because whilst it does seem a little bit cold and detached in some regards, otherwise it then clouds your judgment, and you could go down the route where you start giving the client false hope, and that's something you don't want to be doing. I think those are the main points, really. Just make sure that you're reading everything. If anything's uncertain, raise the question. It might be the fact that you pick up on something that no one else has. And that could be a massive game changer. Really just make the most of the experience, because it's 3 months where you're given so much opportunity to work on a case, which no one else has the opportunity to do. When I've spoken to my former colleagues, they've said that with things like paralegaling or mini pupilages or things like that, you're very much kind of left to the back. You do the mundane paperwork, whereas at the AIRE Centre, you're given a lot of freedom. And the one thing that kind of hit me when I first started was, I've got 3 cases to deal with, go and do it. And in one sense, that's terrifying because, you know, in your hands is your client's fate. But then you've got the challenge, which is very unique. And it kind of comes back to what I was saying about making the most of it. Just dive straight in, get as involved as possible and make the most of it.
That's brilliant.
Thank you.
Well, Jake, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to meet you. And yeah, hopefully it'll be great to stay in touch.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for the opportunity, and likewise.